Everybody that is just tuning in, this is a special podcast, actually. This is a combination Deceptions of the Ages news and Encounters USA podcast. The reason for that being that the topics we're going to cover today, Encounters USA is more of a paranormal podcast, and Deceptions of the Ages news covers all the stuff that we're going to be talking about today. But some of this stuff is also relevant, especially because of the technologies to the extraterrestrial question. So I want to, before we go any farther, I want to welcome Dr. Nick Begich to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, and Nick, we're going to be talking very shortly about your works, and I also want to introduce activist Deborah Tavares to the podcast. Welcome to the podcast, Deborah.
Well, thank you so much, Matt. Actually, I am a researcher and a war reporter.
Okay, well then, and also
beyond activism at this point. It has always been for me. It's about deep research and documents and providing documents that illustrate and demonstrate everything that we talk about from stopthecrime.net, which is our primary website, and then, of course, primarywater.org, which discusses the reality of water and the fact that we are not running out. So, yeah, that's more about the definition of what we represent. Thank you, Matt.
So, Deborah, how's things down there in California? No fires yet?
Well, there was an enormous fire meeting yesterday at the fairgrounds where it was represented by helicopters and first responders and tables galore from NOAA and from ham radio operators and a variety of representations for new appliances, etc., because as you know, in the United States, including Alaska, they're transitioning us out of all gas appliances into all electric pursuant to the climate action plans. And so there's a big rush to all, especially for all new construction, for there to be all gas being eliminated. Only electric, and if you choose to keep your very expensive Viking stove because you've paid thousands of dollars for it and you like to cook on gas, then you're going to have to pay a greenhouse gas tax for polluting.
Okay.
So how is it going here? It's a full-on bore takedown. And We're being told about areas that will burn and that we have to be set up to evacuate, that there will be, in most instances, no support by fire equipment, period. We're on our own if we're in the rural area. So this is no joke. This is horrific. And many people, including people in my immediate community, are preparing to defend what is happening when we have no defense in place other than what we can muster ourselves, particularly when we're finding that the utility, which is run by Rothschild, that specific gas and electric, is going to shut the power off. At the first sign of a red flag warning and the potentiality of ignition, they're going to turn the power off. And if you're in the country on a well, without enough water accessibility and pumps and fire hoses, you can't even put out the embers that we have seen fly a few miles ahead of the flames now.
Wow.
Many people can save their homes if they're equipped to do so. Not that they should be stupid and burn alive, but they can at least save some of their homes. So that's how we are on one level in California. You asked. So I'll relinquish that question now.
Right, and while we're talking, I want to encourage people, if you have access to the internet. Deborah, you are stopthecrime.net, correct?
That is correct, and primarywater.org.
Okay, and we're going to be talking about some of the things, you have so much information on stopthecrime.net, and every piece of it is frightening. And then, Dr. Begich, Nick, what's your website again?
It's earthpulse.com.
Earthpulse.
EARTHPULSE. Earthpulse.
Okay. And, while we're talking, if you want to, go ahead and check out both of those sites, because you are going to get an education. If you don't know the work that Dr. Nick Begich and Deborah Tavares are doing, you really need to get caught up, because they're talking about some very important issues. And today we're going to give you a little bit of the history of some technology. And it's technology that you probably don't want to, or don't know about. And I almost said that you don't want to know about. And in some cases you don't. But the fact is, this is technology that your representatives are voting on. And you have people in the Congress that I wonder if a lot of those people are beyond functionally literate. And I wonder, how could they understand any of these issues that are being placed before them, because they're so technologically advanced. And when you start to hear what Deborah Tavares has to say about California PG&E, it's all really frightening stuff. But we're going to give you a nice little background and give you a framework in which to kind of understand this stuff. So let's start with Dr. Nick Begich. And Nick, can we just jump back in time to Angels Don't Play This HAARP, your first book? Can you talk a little bit about the HAARP project and how that came about?
Well, it's essentially, it's really kind of an old story now. It's 25 years ago that I first looked at that issue. And essentially, HAARP was a joint effort of the Air Force and Navy, and the intent was to figure out ways to manipulate the magnetic field lines surrounding the Earth, and the ionosphere, which also surrounds the Earth, which is a layer about 30 miles above the Earth's surface. And so for a number of weapons applications, the use of this technology became pretty interesting from a military perspective. And what they had figured out is that you could create a signal using radio frequency energy and focus that energy into a relatively small area, which is quite different than the way normally you think about energy coming off of an antenna. It generally spreads out with distance, becomes less dense, which is why radio fades out the further you get away from the transmitter. In this case, using an array or a field of antennas, they're able to create what's called cyclotron resonance, which would be visually, if you could see it, the energy would be kind of corkscrewing around and focusing more and more into a smaller area. And then by pulse modulating the signal, which is essentially just creating a pulse rate out of that signal, then you can create a lot of varying effects. And that's exactly what they did. And so for a number of weapons applications, from over-the-horizon radar, being able to look around the curvature of the Earth, this technology was useful. The idea of bouncing signals off the ionosphere in a way that would penetrate the Earth and see returning a signal back to the surface where you could discriminate underground facilities was one of the early, actually 1995-96 experiments in this area. And then when you look at some of the more esoteric effects, deal with affecting weather systems or gravitational waves, these kinds of things. Beyond that, it's a pretty versatile instrument. I mean, there's a number of articles on the website that kind of break that down. There's plenty of video on the internet if people want to look at it that deal with just that issue for a more thorough explanation. Okay,
and I just want to throw in here, because you've skimmed over a lot of topics. I have you were the inspiration for this book of mine, the RAINIER paradigm, and so that people, because yours is you've given us a nice skim, but the mechanics of this thing are that they have a facility in Alaska, and it beams stuff into the ionosphere, and then, as you say, it beams it back. In my book, I talk about the use of satellites. Are they using satellites to do this?
You don't, not with HAARP. The satellite side of this was looked at by the same inventor, Bernard Eastland, but it would be utilizing space-based lasers for heating certain areas of the atmosphere for mainly for weather effects. And that paper was prepared for the European Space Agency back around, I think, 2002, as I recall. And it was also work done for FEMA along the same lines. It's kind of an odd contract, but it was on how do you take the energy out of tornadoes, as an example, because tornadoes are a wind shear. You know, it's where a warm front comes up against a cold front, you get a shearing action, and then you get the formation of a tornado. And the thought was, well, what if we could heat up that cold front a bit? Could we keep that from happening by not having that differential? So that was FEMA's interest, at least, in that technology in terms of the record.
So what were some of the drawbacks? I mean, what were some of the concerns about that technology?
Well, generally, there are several. First of all, for Earth-penetrating tomography, which I described earlier, which is kind of looking into the Earth or imaging the Earth under the ground, it uses a low-frequency signal, and this is a very long wavelength. It takes a very long wavelength to penetrate the Earth and see to any depth. Microwave, short wavelengths won't do this. Like the 5G, as an example, is a very short wavelength that doesn't penetrate very deeply into the ocean. So you need a long wavelength. They used to do this, and they still do this, using antennas buried in the Aleutian chain and in Wisconsin, and they're 13 to 26 miles long, and they create that long wavelength. With HAARP, you can actually convert the ionosphere from DC, which is how it operates naturally, to AC, alternating current. And that's, again, by pulse modulation. And this is the key element for making radio frequency energy biologically active, even, because it's about the pulse modulation of the signal that creates a coupling, if you will. In this case, a coupling to the ionosphere that then is pulse modulated, so it begins to act like almost like a drum, sending out a very long wavelength. It is a radio frequency wavelength, but it's penetrating the Earth and sea. So they've essentially converted the ionosphere to the antennas that they otherwise have buried in the ground. So it's a way to kind of plug into the natural environment and capitalize on the energy that's there and use that and direct that in a very specific way. And that's the essence of HAARP. It's the idea, and it's not alone in this. There's many technologies, and the idea is to perhaps be the trigger or the primer to release vastly larger amounts of energy that are available within our natural environment. And so HAARP is a triggering mechanism that's being used experimentally to find out what can be done. And to a large degree, the work is done. I mean, it's 25 years of experimentation, although some of your listeners may be just dialing into the issue right now. That's a long time, and it's really on the wind-down stage of what they're going to do with that facility. It's being used for a lot of research intermittently today, and it's primarily controlled by the University of Alaska, with most of the contracts either at their academic institutions or military-related contracts.
Okay, I don't want to sound paranoid, but this is stuff you know. Is it possible there could still be some military things going on that you wouldn't know about?
Of course. To suggest otherwise would be totally wrong. But to make speculation in that area is not necessary. The record's clear on what it can do. The only question is, are they? And if you trust this government, you know, buy their press releases. But otherwise, you might want to take a closer look.
Okay, so I got to ask, Deborah, is any of this stuff starting to ring a bell with you?
Well, I think it's, as Nick was saying, this is old news. Mm-hmm. I think we're well beyond that. I think much of the initial experimentation is over. I agree also that there's much we don't know that is being utilized on us mm-hmm. for our demise, and the control of what was at one time a natural environment. I don't know how much of a natural environment still exists to be quite frank. And I, too, have traveled all over the world, and I have seen the effects of many technologies, not only the atmospheric technologies and the aerosols, but also the economic technologies that are destroying everything about everything. And Nick, I was discovering some time back in looking at Pacific Gas and Electric, who is the utility company here in Northern California that is declaring bankruptcy because of their participation in starting the fires. Now, that is, of course, just a media psyops. Pacific Gas and Electric is Rothschild. In fact, Rothschild LLC and Company and others are in control of the utilities worldwide, and that's why we have the deployment of the global smart electric meter, the grid. And why we are now finding that they are deploying global control of the wireless water metering system as well. But in the process of looking at Pacific Gas and Electric and realizing what is behind their bankruptcy, this becomes even more disturbing. What we are finding is that Pacific Gas and Electric is bailing out of some of the traditional forms of delivering electricity to us through their hydroelectric facilities here in Northern California. They've actually said that in the Russian River area, which is near Bohemian Grove, that they're abandoning a hydroelectric plant because they can't afford the deferred maintenance of that dam and the liability of that dam. And they've announced that they realize that this will affect over 500,000 people with water supply. That's, of course, from the illusion that water needs to come from reservoirs and through the aqueduct system that is not necessary. We could go back to Muammar Gaddafi and to accessing primary water, but I'll discuss that maybe later. But what we did discuss and find out, Nick, and maybe you know about this program and maybe not, because there are so many programs that are occurring. But we found out that Pacific Gas and Electric has signed on with Solaren Corporation, Solaren Corporation, that is based in Manhattan Beach in Southern California. They've partnered up with Russia. They're using Russian technologies and Russian patents, along with the United States and many other countries, including Canada, China, the European Union, India, Japan, again, the Federation of Russia, and the United States. And what is this? This is electricity from lasers from space. And the utilities have this big secret, and they will be imposing a sun tax.
So, Deborah, can I jump in for a second here, because you've kind of gone a little bit ahead, and what I was trying to do in talking about this HAARP technology is what you just said is really where I'd like this discussion to go, but we have not talked. I'd just like to ask Nick about the human. What are the human effects? Because where we're going with this, we're going to be talking about 5G. We're going to be talking about all this stuff. But the HAARP, when, according to Nick's book, Angels Don't Play This HAARP, the HAARP was developed because of Tesla technology to take energy from the North Slope, which they had a lot of this natural gas, convert it to whatever energy, and then send it to a satellite, bounce it back into the Earth, which is exactly what you're saying. So why we started this whole conversation with the HAARP was for that very reason, because I just want people to have the background that this is Tesla technology. It's been around for a long time, and so you guys can go ahead, but I just wanted to throw that in there. And in a little bit, I'd like to talk about the players, but this is ancient Tesla technology.
Well, in terms of the energy source, the project started with Atlantic Richfield, which was a major holder of natural gas resources at the time on the North Slope, and they had no market. They still don't have a market for it. There's no pipelines taking natural gas off the North Slope of Alaska, although we have hundreds of trillions of cubic feet there, enough to run the world for quite some time. The thing that they did is they said, well, maybe we can just generate electric out of this gas here, and the thought was they would use magneto-hydrodynamic generators, which are very efficient at converting gas to electricity, and then utilizing the electricity there, running it through these arrays to focus it for weapons applications. And at that time, it was the concept was a global intercontinental ballistic missile shield by energizing the northern regions of the world and energizing the magnetic field lines in such a way that any object passing through those fields would be disrupted. Their onboard computers would fail and they would crash. And so that was kind of the original thing. And then there was actually going back quite a ways to Governor Wally Hickel in Alaska. He at one point had a gentleman by the name of Glenn Olds who ran one of the universities. And what they were talking about was beaming energy, actually transferring energy from one location to another by converting to microwave, which is another form of radio wave, if you will, just shorter wavelengths, and actually send the energy wirelessly from one point to another. And this gets more in line with what Tesla was thinking about. The other place this comes out is in the early testimony and actual congressional discussion. In the U.S. Senate, Ted Stevens had mentioned at one point the idea that we would be able to tap the ionosphere and bring energy down from the ionosphere. And if you remember, a number of years ago, there was an experiment run with the space shuttle where they drug a tether, a long conducting line through the ionosphere, and it almost blew the space shuttle up because it conducted so much energy and shunted that energy into the space shuttle and just about overloaded everything. What they discovered there was much more available energy potential in the ionosphere than they thought. And so how would you use that? Well, if you could drag a conductor through that field, then what you could do is maybe shunt energy into a low-orbiting space platform, for example, which would allow you to keep a space platform in orbit indefinitely by being able to resupply the energy source. The problem in the early days was, again, focusing energy to transfer it from one point to the other in the appropriate form. This was accomplished through HAARP. The problem is when anything passes through that beam, like an aircraft or something with sensitive electronics, it has the same effect as an EMP. It blows the circuits. It interferes with the avionics. It causes things to crash. If you think a cell phone on an airplane creates problems like Tron, think about something generating power on the level that we're talking about. And that's, again, why it was kind of pitched as impractical. Now, it reflects on Tesla only in the fact that it was referenced by Eastland. And I knew Ben Eastland fairly well up until his passing. And what I can say is, the concept was more than that. It was the idea that perhaps, going back to Tesla again, there was a way to tap natural energy and provide free energy to the planet. And that was the basic concept. I can assure you the military is not interested in giving free energy to anybody. They're interested in military applications. And so that's always been the thrust of the program.
Well, metering as well, too, Nick, where they want to charge for whatever energy is provided for all of us as well.
But Deborah, the meters...
The whole thing about this carbon culture, you live in California, and unfortunately you live in a place where people are really deluded, okay? And most of the country isn't going along with a carbon tax, and I don't think they will. On a global level,
we need to talk about that.
Hydrocarbons are the answer. Right now, natural gas is the answer. It is the transitional fuel that makes sense. And if you look at wind and the inefficiency of wind, and you look at solar's getting closer, but it's still inefficient. And although they give 20 years on these panels, they're finding that they break down in 5, and the economics is a failure. When you look at energy density in terms of BTUs, and you look at 4 billion people coming into the middle class over the next 40 years in the world, they are not going to be looking at solar. They are going to be looking at hydrocarbons.
Okay, so now let me stop you right here because I have some additional information, because certainly I hear California all the time as being basically a target area for all of this. It is not. And sadly, the longer we think that other states everywhere, globally as well, countries and nations everywhere, are all have adopted and have in place climate action plans that are equivalent to elimination of all resources. And these are genocide plans that are in play based on the false reality of climate change being a natural factor, when in fact we know that there is sinister use of technology overriding what we're seeing. We know that, as you were saying, Nick, that the solar and the wind, and certainly the hydroelectric and other aspects of energy production, what they're telling us, and as you said too, they're not reliable. They're not reliable because the weather is controlled. So you cannot have a ground-based solar system when we have increased solar dimming from the aerosol spraying programs. You cannot have a wind-powered renewable system when the wind is controlled. And you cannot create electricity from waves, WAVES, as the attempts are being made now as well, when the coastline is controlled by blast wave accelerators and other aspects of technology that are already adding acidification to the ocean and killing our environment. So I'm very concerned about the reality of the depth of our reality and the expression of that reality, and the fact that PG&E and other countries are contractually going forward with energy from outer space, from space-based satellites, to control all energy and use as a weapon system. They tell us, as you suggested and said, Nick, that they're using lasers as part of a military function. They are. This is in part what is suggested behind these fires that have erupted, not only here, but elsewhere throughout the world. So Solar Incorporation, we have a 5-part YouTube video series up on stopthecrime.net, and I would certainly ask that everybody take a look at that. It is called Genocide is Legal, and we go through what happened, how we do not have a legislative branch that's functioning. Much of what is occurring in the legislature is theater. It's all puppetry. And much of what is being told to the legislative branch is coming from the Rand Corporation and other universities. We do not have a government that we sadly believe that we do. And I would recommend a YouTube called The Swamp, SWAMP. It's a short 3-part YouTube demonstrating how newly elected congressional members are discussing their inefficiency and ineffectiveness as they enter their congressional Washington, D.C. offices, and to their chagrin, find out that it is the staffers that are controlling everything, to the extent of telling them how to vote. And if they do not toe the line, they become targeted individuals. And I mean targeted individuals in the sense that they're attacked, they're marginalized, and many of them are forced to leave out of frustration and out of attacks on their families. This is a very real reality, and it is happening at a greater degree now as we are being taken apart globally on every single level. And I certainly see it when I talk to my friends in other countries, the types of takedown, the type of policy, the takedown of agriculture, the takedown of the water supplies, the intention to reduce all resources and to literally create massive migration, climate immigrants is what we're seeing. by and large, along with just horrific protesting in the streets. Because what we recognize as what happened with the yellow vests in France, for example, they were protesting against the fact that they weren't able to feed their family with all the new policies. They weren't earning enough money to pay increasing rents and to buy food, and so they were peacefully demonstrating to create that awareness. Millions of people in France, not just in Paris. And what they found out, as what was illustrated to us when we went to London by some people that were representing the face of the yellow vests protesting, is that there were mercenaries from other parts of Europe coming in and literally attacking these people with these rubber bullets and shooting them in the face and putting their eyes out and trying to quail the awareness that France was bringing. Now, it's recognized that France has been taken. It is a totalitarian regime, as in most countries now, and the United States is no exception, sadly. When we're being sprayed with chemtrails, when our water supply is poisoned, our food is now being redirectioned by an executive order on June the 11th of 2019 to be all genetically modified because of food scarcity issues and climate change. And everyone here in the United States believes that because the current CEO of USA Inc. has not joined the Paris Peace Accord, that we have not agreed. That is false. We fully have all of the climate action plans engaged in all of our cities. And the way that these are being pushed forward in our cities, in every city, is unimaginable. And I can tell you, they're creating a circular economy and an economy where we own nothing. And that is the goal of the reality that we all live in right now, with technologies that have been used to disrupt everything and to literally, by those in power, the most powerful people, to cull and reduce the population. And Nick, I think, and both Matt, I think you both are aware of the report from Iron Mountain, and that came out in the mid-'60s after JFK was murdered. And that report talks about how they would create climate change, how that was necessary to replace the war machine because people would be tired of dropping bombs. Well, the sad reality is that all of the technology that's been tested overseas, directed energy weapons, mind control, certainly we saw the Rwanda genocide. We know what happened in the mid-'90s with Operation Crimson Mist and the takeover of people's minds with frequency. So I would say we're far advanced into a complete takedown and elimination of massive amounts of population. And when we look at the Deagle.com website, a military website that I've done a radio show with Dr. Bill Deagle, not the same Deagle, and we learn that the plan, and of course not all plans go through as planned, but the intention is to reduce the population in the industrialized world significantly. The United States, as I recall, is about an 84% reduction by the year 2025, and subsequently in the UK and Australia and elsewhere. And you can take a look at that. It's, that interview is on stopthecrime.net, and it is entitled 5G, the Culling of Humanity, and that's where we talk about that particular genocide program. And of course, the United States signed on under Nixon in 1988 onto the genocide treaty, and which provides for an annual culling of the population by the use of many aspects of technology.
Okay,
that,
Deborah,
is not being discussed. Thank you.
Yeah, you cover all these topics that I really want to talk about, but I'd like to keep a certain framework to this discussion, and we never got an answer to the question. If we go all the way back to the HAARP thing, and this is where we get into the technology you're talking about the eradication of the population. Is Nick, what's the story? I mean, what are the human effects of these waves, whatever you're talking about, what are the effects on people from like the HAARP? And was that technology transferred into cell phones and then it's going into 5G?
Let me say this is we just heard a very long string of 50 different issues from the other guests, and it's thrown an awful lot out to your listening audience in a way that is unstructured. What I'd really like to focus on a bit is, having heard all those things, so what's the solution? I'd like to hear a solution set, because the only thing that's happened so far in this program, which is disturbing to me, is we've generated an awful lot of fear. And I don't particularly care to do that. And it's not my nature, and it's not what I'm about. And anyone who's followed my work knows that. So I agreed to do this program, but I'm going to sign off now, because it is not a program that I'm interested in feeding that fear. So we can reschedule this at another time. But today is not the day. I'm going to terminate my side of this conversation and let you guys continue with your program.
Okay, I respect that, Dr. Nick. Thank you for your time, and we'll try it again some other time.
We'll try it again another time.
Okay, thank you, and you have a super day. Deborah, are you still there?
Yes, I am, and I'm sorry that Nick has taken that position. Certainly, as a mother and a wife and a grandmother, and knowing these issues by looking at the documents, I cannot underscore the reality of these documents with more truth than I said. And while some of this and most of it is scary, in order to understand solutions, we need to understand what we face. And there are people that are working on technologies in our defense to create frequency shields. These are very real technologies that will help people survive the intention to reduce the population by the use of a silent weapons system of warfare. Mm-hmm. And I am not opposed to going along with the idea of a global consciousness and emerging into a higher framework, but we are being held down by powerful people that are not allowing us to ascend in whatever religious venue and wherever we are by technologies. So it's up to those people now that start to become aware of the types of programs that we face, and they are redundant. Mm-hmm. And it is scary, and it will cause fear. But then there is the other side of that, then knowing. And as long as we continue to be told this is too scary, I'm not going to talk about it, we're going to continue to be taken out with policies that are taking us out. And we're all, I think, as you can maybe agree with, Matt, there are many people that are consciously aware that something is really amiss. Something is really not right.
Well, and so, Deborah, can I just... I understand exactly what you're saying, and just to kind of explain things, I think from Nick's point of view is that he's heard this ever since he wrote that book. I mean, can you imagine 30 years of people like me coming back and bringing that up? And he is trying to be negative or trying to be positive. That's his thing. He tries to spread positive vibes, and I doubt he's ever seen your website. So, and what he has a very valid point. What you're saying is very depressing, but I mean, if we just stick our head in the sand, then who are we? And what you're talking about, and what I was really hoping to get out with him, is we didn't get to the point of, because I said, well, what are we going to do about it? Well, we don't know what the problem is because we never talked about who the problem is, right? So why don't you tell us?
I think we got to the point that negative conversation was not good, and that was then the end.
Right, but we were, but But really what we need to talk about is who's responsible for it. And do you have any opinions about that? Because I certainly do.
Well,
I wrote a whole book about it.
Yeah, it's not opinions. And certainly if you've investigated and found who the many corporations and individuals and foundations are responsible for this, we have layers and layers of responsibility. Mm-hmm. We have daily workers that earn a paycheck that are responsible for rolling out 5G because they're getting a paycheck.
Right.
We have current workers that are creating telephone poles now into weapons. They're earning a paycheck. Are they responsible, or are they compartmentalized, or are they not able to get any other kind of a job? Because what we're finding now, sadly, is many of the jobs are related to literally capturing us within this system. And that is a sad reality now. People that work for federal government agencies, any of the agencies at all, health departments, think many are doing good. But when you look at who's behind these agencies, as we have, you find that they're all behind reducing greenhouse gas emissions, which is behind a global lie of weather weapons disguising climate change. And when you read fossil fuels and eliminating the use of fossil fuels because we're running out, that is a scientific fraudulent disinformation. We've never used dead dinosaurs as our petroleum. This was a Rockefeller creation so that there could be an amass of profits over a fuel that was going to be highly controlled. One of the reasons that they're shutting down Venezuela right now is because they want them to stop producing the petroleum on the open market. You can't say we're running out of something when other countries are profiting by it and pumping it out, because it doesn't end. It's a renewable, just like water. So we can pretend that these things aren't happening if it makes you feel better. And there are far too many people that are pretending and unaware. And sadly, with the amount of redundant systems that we face, unless people start to take some responsibility for the knowledge that has been withheld from them, they will become victims in the worst way. And that will likely bring around their illnesses and their deaths. So I can only say that this is an opportunity of growing into reality we have to face. And that's most important, is to face the reality that we are really in.
Okay.
And
Deborah,
and yes,
I really want to get, I mean, these things are all well and good, but my intention in doing this podcast was I want people to know the nuts and bolts of what's going on, and we're kind of just skimming over things. So I need to establish one thing. You and Nick both talked about space-based energy, correct?
yes,
Energy is going to come from space, and it's going to be transferred to and this is all I was trying to get at. They're going to send energy from space to the Earth, to a space station or a substation, and it's going to send energy out that will be metered, correct?
Well,
is that what you're talking about?
Well, in part. Let me explain. And this is specifically about the Solaren program, SOLAREN, which I was mentioning when we were speaking with Nick. And what this program is, it is creating energy from space, from satellites. And it says where the sun always shines. Now, this is on our Pacific Gas and Electric website. Now, whether it's still there, I don't know. But you can certainly take a look at this as part of the 5-part YouTube series on stopthecrime.net on our video channel. But they say that energy from outer space And they say it may seem like the stuff of science fiction, but it's actually reality.
Right. And go ahead.
So I was going to describe this. They say where no watt, W-A-T-T, has gone before. They go where the sun always shines. Solar radiation is the most promising form of space-based power. While a growing solar energy industry already exists, outsourcing to space will help solve a lot of issues. They say that land-based solar power is limited by night, cloud cover, and the atmosphere. In space, the sun never goes away. And they say solar panels in space will be attached to orbiting satellites stationed on the moon. And they go on to talk about how they're going to do this. This is surreal. And I can only tell you that all the major countries are working together on this, and it is a utility company secret. Mm-hmm. And it was disclosed maybe only about a year ago, but that came about through an email exchange.
Okay.
That was part of a YouTube that we posted entitled Plan to Burn Up Northern California. Now, for the listeners, what that email exchange was, it was an email exchange between the utility company and the Public Utility Commission in using space-based weapons. And I won't go over that email exchange in detail. Again, you can take a look at that and see this for yourselves on Stop the Crime. But again, the Solar Incorporation, as I mentioned, is in Southern California, and it holds patents for transmitting microwave-directed energy from space to pinpoint locations on Earth. It holds patents for this.
Okay.
And under some of the other patents, which we give the numbers of the patents, they say that the solar-powered satellite will generate a powerful microwave radio frequency beam focused on an array of collector antennas, where it will be transformed to electrical power supplied by our utility companies. They go on to say, under one of the other patents, that the solar-powered satellite will generate a powerful microwave radio frequency beam to control weather by heating deployments of aluminum oxide and other conductive particulates sprayed from the aircraft. The patent describes methods of steering and changing the intensity of hurricanes. We know that that's already been done, being done, and will increase. Okay. We know the extent of the control of the weather. Now, is this scary? I don't know. Who is listening that wouldn't be at least minimally concerned that there are these kinds of technologies that are deforming, transforming, and wiping out areas of where people live? Who wouldn't be concerned that the Bahamas was hit and that there are now 70,000 homeless people? Who wouldn't be concerned after the fires in Northern California that our streets are literally lined with RVs, recreational vehicles, because people lost their homes and there is no housing? Yeah. Who wouldn't be concerned about the reality that we see with our own eyes as a consequence of these multiple redundant weapon systems? Who wouldn't be concerned? And if this is fearful, well, then so be it. But we have to take action, and certainly we have to take and utilize whatever solutions we can drum up by knowing and learning what we face. And when people ask Matt about solutions are strictly what people understand the problem to be. Period.
Okay, but we're still just jumping ahead here, and we need to so that people understand that are listening to this, the power that there is technology, and this is all what I was trying to get established with Nick, is that with the HAARP, they established the technology to transfer energy from Earth to space. And then, of course, they would have the ability to transfer it from space to Earth. But so that was what Nick's role in all this was, and how we have that technology to do it. And because I just know that there's people out there going, oh sure, how are they going to do that? That sounds like Star Wars or something. But you were saying that yes, your power company, and this is what really caught my attention, your power company put out that they're going to start sending energy from space, and then you just started talking about the psychological aspect of it, and who wouldn't be concerned? I'll tell you who's not going to be concerned. Anybody who's not affected by it. If I'm sitting in Seattle and I don't have a fire, I'm just going, well, thank God I don't live there. I don't live in the Bahamas. That's who's concerned or not concerned about it, and that's what the PSYOP is. Anyway, but before we go there, Deborah, can we talk?
I would like to add one thing to what you just said, because no one is void of the effects of these redundant systems, be it what is being used in weather manipulation and how people in different localities are facing disasters. Everyone is facing the economy of the policies that are already adopted in your communities.
Okay, but
I think without exception, that is going to be recognized by people as there is increased homelessness, whether there's a fire, a flood, or an earthquake that is generated. Mm-hmm. And what the major forms of renewable energies that are now being directed is geothermal, solar, and wind. And geothermal operations on the Ring of Fire. And when they inject, in our instance here, I'm only an hour away from the largest geothermal operation in the world. Mm-hmm. And we've toured that. And they utilize human waste that they pump up to these mountains, where there are multiple boreholes in the Ring of Fire. And they inject this human waste to produce electricity. And this is going to be one of the primary sources of electricity. And they cause geothermal operations cause daily earthquakes. There are seismic monitors on those mountains in the Mayacamas Mountains here in Sonoma County that the USGS has deployed. We have daily earthquakes up there. And now that is going to become one of our major sources of electricity in this region. And that means more injection, more earthquakes, more acid rain, because of all of the different gases that are emitting from this program that is not intended to benefit us. It's intended to cause earthquakes. And I can only tell you, Matt, I know that for many this may sound like a lot, because it is. So where would you like to back into this and have me slow down a bit, perhaps?
Well, I want to go into, we've jumped from space-based energy to now sounds like crappy energy. And I want to, I'd like to leave that because we want to, I still want to focus on this HAARP kind of space-based technology, because what we haven't ever talked about is the effect on human beings. What happens if somebody gets in the way, like Nick was talking about, if an airplane flies in it? But are those energy waves so concentrated they're not going to land in the surrounding area and hit people and warm them up or cook them? Because it sounds to me like they're not really releasing just the specifics of the energy. So what does it affect? Not 5G, but what's the effect on human beings of space-based energy?
Well, I certainly wished that Nick had stayed on the line to discuss that, since he's written a book about it. Mm-hmm. But what I can say as energy in general is that we're certainly seeing more of an electromagnification in the environment. We're becoming highly combustible with the heavy metals that are being sprayed from the aerosol sparing programs. We're seeing massive die-off of trees by the millions and millions worldwide. We're seeing fires that are hotter and faster than ever before. And the effects of the accumulation of the technologies that were originally discovered and discussed as HAARP technologies have expanded and become more pervasive. Mm-hmm. And now we're looking at not only the effects of all of the cell phone towers, all of the wireless. In fact, with the combustibility factor in the areas of fire, which when you look at the climate action plans, if people just type in, and you can do this too, you can type in where you live, followed by energy or climate action plans or resilient plans, mm-hmm. and you will find out the intention and the kinds of climate changes that they say you will face if you don't radically reduce your use of resources. Mm-hmm. And that includes eliminating gas. Mm-hmm. Not only petroleum, but gas in your homes, which is already occurring. You can type it in. All the cities now that are eliminating natural gas in homes. This is becoming a huge new economy of retrofitting and creating a new reality based on fraud and based on the capturing of technology and being used to direct where we live, force relocations, and force massive increase in home ownership, which is all part of the plan. And as far as what you keep wanting to discuss with HAARP, I think you heard it clearly from Nick that that's old technology. That's 25 years ago.
Well,
it's advanced.
It's old, but but that technology has been transferred. I mean, we're talking about energy, and really, I'm not trying to stay focused on HAARP. I just wanted people to understand that technology has been there for a while, and it's not a dream. It's for real. So I'll leave HAARP alone.
Yeah, I really think we're at a point now where people. That's why much of what we do on Stop the Crime, mm-hmm. with showing the documents that are already adopted in our cities. Yeah. These are not our assumptions, our guesstimates. These are adopted policies that everyone is under. Our cities have no jurisdiction. This is why people that have been going to their cities and their boards of supervisors trying and attempting to oppose 5G are making no progress because they have no jurisdiction. We are United States, Inc. We are a corporation. In fact, we are Earth, Inc. And we're not running by elections and elected officials and legislative branches, as we've sadly been told. I think most people realize we have a phony fiat currency. Well, in just knowing that fact alone, build up from there. I will tell you, Matt, one of the most important aspects of understanding was the fact we don't have a functioning government. And I think as many people now are understanding, it allows for a broader expanse of realizing our reality. Because when we have a corporation that has goals as outlined in policies that we were never taught in school, like the report from Iron Mountain. Goodness, the government, when it was released to Johnson after Kennedy was murdered, that's the report from Iron Mountain, it was said to be a hoax. It was never a hoax. And like Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars, the first chapter in Behold a Pale Horse, the book. And I can only say we didn't read these things. We didn't know. We were not taught. We were deceived.
Okay, but Deborah, let's, I understand that, and I know that, a lot of people that are listening understand it, but let's focus on specifics here, because I want to talk about, I really wanted to talk about the effects, but we can come back to that when we talk about 5G. But let's talk about the WHO. This is just all I want to say, and you can throw in what you want. But I wrote another book. It's called Deceptions of the Ages, and anyway, in that book, I talk about the Freemasons, and I talk about the Rothschilds, and I talk about how because you have a list of characters out there. You have Adam Schiff is your representative, right? And he's in the Congress on the Intelligence Committee. Well, the Schiffs were the neighbors of the Rothschilds back in Germany, back in the 1700s.
It's a puppet show. He's not a representative, okay? It's a puppet show.
Well,
so let's be very clear.
I know, but that's how much of a puppet show it is. And how could the people of California be so ignorant as to fall for that, as to let an actual representative of the Rothschild family be in Well, I mean, most of the people in Congress are representatives of the Rothschilds. But I want to ask you some questions because you've brought up a lot of topics, so I'm going to ask you some questions because you seem to know a lot about these things. And the first question is I had when you're talking about depopulating the earth, I was telling a guy I'm going to interview you, and he brought up the point, what good is it to depopulate the earth if they don't have slaves working for them? So what would you say to that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And certainly when we look at the NASA war document that is on stopthecrime.net, that was a PowerPoint given by the chief NASA scientist 2 months before 9/11, we read about bots, cyborgs, and humans, and it's about eliminating humans and the transition to robotics. Because mechanical transitions into robotics, they claim, is a reduction of people on the planet. We're being told that we're too large, we're too heavy, we're too cost inefficient, and we present too much of a degradation to the planet, where robotics do not. So I think everyone is starting to see the transition to mechanization. We're seeing schools closing now for declining enrollment, because certainly we see that the population is declining and there are fewer childbirths, even though there are announcements to the contrary. We see lack of enrollment, and we see schools closing. Well, it talks in the NASA war plan that brick-and-mortar buildings will disappear. Everything will be home-based. And so we're seeing that transition already occurring. When you have AI, artificial intelligence, you have the capability that is now presenting itself scientifically that supersedes people's intellect. We're not needed. Simply put, as they say it.
But I mean, who's going to serve the masters? Are they going to have robots to do it? And I mean, are they really trying to get rid of?
We can only surmise. Certainly, when we look at the documents, and the documents tell us that, we can. I guess we might say that perhaps the masters will be served in different ways than what we've ever known before. We're living our lives in the past, in what we recognize as in the past. And because of the emerging capabilities that are bursting forth from revolutionary advances in life scientists, and it makes the principal agents, it's an evolution change is what is occurring.
Okay.
And that's what's happened.
Well, can I ask you a question, Deborah, then? When we're looking at the population and immigration, and you're talking about like a global immigration based on climate change, are they bringing these people, as I say in my book, The Rainier Paradigm, are they bringing them here to kill them? Is that what they're doing?
Let me talk about forced migration and displacement. Certainly we know when we hit coastlines with technologies that are intended to disrupt coastlines, with blast wave accelerators called Operation SEAL, SEAL.
Can you describe those? Can you describe what these things are?
I will.
Okay.
In the NASA War document, our research team kept reading blast wave accelerators. And in that NASA plan, it talked about Operation SEAL, SEAL. And when that was discussed with a platform of people and researched, it was discovered, and easily discovered, that Operation SEAL was an operation worked on with the United States in Auckland during World War II. And had either one of the two bombs not detonated on Japan, they were going to use what they call a blast wave accelerator. It was a tsunami bomb to wipe out the low-lying coastal areas. So a number of months, maybe a year and a half or so ago, our research team found some verbiage in some building and planning documents here in Southern California. It was in planning and building documents in Del Mar, California. Del Mar, California is in Southern California. It is an extremely wealthy beach community. The homes are in the millions of dollars, and they're low-lying on the beach. And there was a meeting, very hot meeting by homeowners at the county board or at their city council there in Del Mar, California. And they did not want planned retreat defined in their building codes. So as builders, and having had language that we look at when we see things like that, in investigating planned retreat, we found that because of the presumption of sea level rise and coastal shore erosion, that people were going to have to relocate and forfeit their homes to the ocean. And there would not be any, of course, monetary reimbursement to them. They would have to walk away and in some instances demolish the homes because they would become a material threat along the coastlines. So what ended up happening is that there were many lawsuits because these are very wealthy people. Mm-hmm. They did not want planned retreat in their building and planning and zoning codes. So they sued against keeping that out of their codes. And then, as time went by, the FEMA came in and redrew the flood maps, showing that that entire area would flood. And now those people are unable to get flood insurance. Mm-hmm. And when we looked further into planned retreat, and we looked at it on a global basis, we found that the coastal commissions along the western United States are all behind these technologies of relocating people off the coastlines because of shore erosion, which is part of a technology engineered to create and exacerbate sea level rise and storm surge, which is what we saw in the Bahamas. We've heard people talk about on the Outer Banks along the eastern seaboard of this last and most recent hurricane that they have never, ever seen sea surge as high. It even exceeded the buildup of homes on stilts that were designed to withstand 100-year storm surges.
Right.
Because we're being told this is now climate change, and we can expect devastating effects. These are technologies. We discovered that Russia has a blast wave accelerator that can create waves of unimaginable heights.
Okay. Well, Deborah, I want to just stop you for a second here. Because what would this machine even look like? I mean, it would have to be huge. Have you seen it, or?
Of course, no. I have not seen it. I would challenge anybody and ask people to identify what they're doing.
Well, what I would say,
there are people, Matt. There are people involved in this, and they know what they're doing. So it would be nice if a few whistleblowers would come forward. But these are technologies that are being used. Our oceans are being destroyed.
Yeah, but you don't need a machine for that. I mean, 1940s, I don't know how they would have accomplished that. But if you have a laser, if you have a microwave that you can send from space that can power a city, if you just send it into the ocean, what's it going to do? It's going to heat it up. Water level is going to rise naturally. You don't need a big machine. You just need that.
Well, I'm not saying that it
heater.
was a big machine.
Yeah.
I've never described the blast wave accelerator as a big machine.
Right. I just like to be simple.
I'm only saying that people can look up Operation SEAL and find out that there were technologies capable of creating tsunamis.
Yeah.
And so that's what people need to understand. And for those that are listening, look it up. Just look it up. And and also recognize that worldwide, many of the low-lying areas, you can type in, for example, London, planned retreat. You'll find many areas around the coastal areas of England and Wales and Ireland that are under massive plans of planned retreat. In fact, there's already a town in Wales that is being relocated right now.
Yeah.
There are many towns in Africa that have been relocated right now, fishing villages and so forth, because of these technologies.
All right, so Deborah, I live in Washington State. I'm always on the coast, right? And where I grew up, there's cliffs. We have a sandbar called the Spit, and its elevation is 3 or 4 feet. And it's the longest sandbar in the world. Look it up on Google Maps. Look at Sequim, Washington on the Strait of Juan de Fuca. But according to global warming things that I've been reading since 1987, that thing would have disappeared a long time ago, and it's still there. There is definitely evidence, because when I was growing up, there was always driftwood along the beach there, but that gets picked up and carried away by the higher tides. But none of the houses have been inundated. The lighthouse out at the end of the Spit is still there, and the coastline all along Washington State, with the exception of the beaches getting cleaned a little bit more, is basically the same. So when you're talking about this machine, or not a machine, but this device that can cause these effects, that's something, because I don't see, and people are probably going to leave lots of comments, but I don't see the effects of an ocean rise. And I live right next to the ocean. Don't see it at all.
I can appreciate that, that you maybe are not visually yet experiencing personal effects, which is what you also stated a bit ago. Unless you are feeling some personal effects of some of these horrific assaults and use of technology against us, then you won't recognize things. So what I believe is important to do as a human being and as in defense of humanity is not to isolate ourselves within the non-effect zone, to recognize that there are technologies being used against many that are going unreported, and people are being displaced by the millions worldwide. And this is a designed program. And we have found the documents, Matt, that explain how these programs are moving forward. Mm-hmm. And we found many of these documents in the World Bank documents, where now we're being told that there is going to only be green financing. Green financing means that if the project you propose and you want to borrow money for, unless it meets the sustainability standards of what everybody is talking about, the New Green Deal, unless it meets those standards, you won't get financing. This goes back to my earlier discussion about how many people are working to bring down a system of destruction on us, and they're unaware. They're compartmentalized. The media is sectioning off news where we're not hearing what is occurring in other locations worldwide. But we're all under the same takedown redundant systems of economic and technological and psychotronic weapons systems of mass mind control and more.
Okay.
And directed energy weapons targeting individuals. And I would say that what I'm saying is outrageously unimaginable, but it is outrageously unimaginable, and it's sadly the reality that we're all in. And many other locations worldwide are more aware than many of us in the United States. And we can only surmise why that is. Most areas in the United States have been heavily fluoridated for many, many years. Our food supply has been poisoned. Certainly we have had bioweapons used on us with viruses. We know certainly that we have an epidemic of Lyme disease, all a bioweapons system. There are amazing books of whistleblowers talking about all of this. Mm-hmm. We're under mass assault.
Yeah.
Mass assault.
Yeah.
And all I can say is while we are still able to think, we need to. And for those people that are not yet literally controlled by frequencies, which has been a document that we've had on stopthecrime.net for a number of years. It was given to us by a whistleblower called the Aquarius Operations Briefing. And I do talk about that in that 5-part video YouTube series that we have up on Stop the Crime. And it is about the intentional use of frequencies that have long since been deployed on us for mind control.
Right. And that was why I brought Nick on here, because his book, Controlling the Human Mind, is centered on that. Deborah, can I give you a little bit of kind of a history lesson? And you, I'm sure, know this, but let's talk a little bit about this Green Deal that you keep mentioning, and why is it so important? The reason, I'd like to give you an answer, and then you can tell me if I'm right or wrong.
Sure.
But historically, and Nick made a very good point, that right now the fossil fuels are the transitional fuel, correct? It's the energy of transition, as he said. So
it's not a fossil fuel. One.
but it's
we have to get that right.
Okay, so petroleum-based
what
products.
Never came from dead dinosaurs.
Yeah. Okay.
So there's a very short, important YouTube called "The Origins of Oil."
Okay.
That I would recommend everyone listen to. Origins of Oil.
Okay.
Most important. We've been deceived on that.
Okay. But anyway, his point being that it's the transitional fuel, because our whole economy is based upon petroleum, whatever petroleum is. So petroleum has, for the last 100 years, been the king. Petroleum, Rockefeller, Standard Oil, all the subsidiaries, whatever, they have controlled the American economy. They have elected presidents, representatives, and they have decided whether or not we're going to go to war. Now, why would we suddenly be saying, oh, well, we're going to dump this technology on our social system, and we're going to adopt a completely different one? And you bring up a very good point, and that is that those are not really dependable, and that the transition is going to cause massive disruption. So I just want to say that makes really a lot of sense to me. But the other thing that you have to look at is that all the governments in the world are broke. who's going to pay for it? We're going to have to go into so much debt to the Rothschilds again, who the Rothschilds build up the petroleum deal, and they made lots of money off that, and the weapons and the wars and all that. And now they're going to make another ton, and this is probably going to be it. They're going to make so much money off of this green technology that, there's going to be no democracies anymore because...
there isn't any now.
Yeah, but what's going to happen now is when we start talking about, when you're talking about your 5G and stuff, they're going to basically be able to monitor everything you do, send out vibes that you're going to be happy or sad, and whatever. And so you could go ahead and talk about the 5G now, but I just wanted to make that point that this transition is only going to benefit one group of people, and that, just like everything else, and that is the super rich. So what do you have to say about that? Yeah.
And sadly, many of the very wealthy have been used as cutouts to advance these programs, and the most powerful will eliminate them. We're seeing the demise of many wealthy people being thrown under the bus right now and being exposed. But I won't go into that. I do want to discuss 5G because it is a death sentence globally to people because of the frequencies. We don't survive these frequencies. It is a complete disruptor to our immune system and to our cells. Cells, cells, and we know that. What we talk about again in that 5-part video YouTube series, which I will not have time to get into great detail here on the show because I've probably got about 15 minutes left. We could do a program all day long, Matt, and still not cover all of the reality that we're in. But it is most important for people to understand this was a technology that was spoken about a very long time ago. And I just recently, a few minutes ago, told you about the Aquarius operations briefing. And I want to go back to that because this is the goal. It is the planned chemical sedation of the populations, and it is microwave radio frequencies for mass mind control. And the Aquarius Operation Group now uses new procedures for mass manipulation and mind control, which are more reliable and successful than earlier methods since those implementing the manipulations are able to maintain complete anonymity. Again, this is all part of a silent weapon system for a quiet war, and that's what's happened. And they go on to tell us that few people ever had possession of the Aquarius operations briefing. But one person that had possession of it for years and knew this briefing document contained small punctuation errors. Each copy that was distributed had different errors. So whoever may have leaked it while they were alive would have been identified. So when this source of this document was released, they had died. So it couldn't be traced back to them. They were already dead. And so this report, Aquarius Group Operations Briefing, is on StopTheCrime.net. And what it is about is the electromagnetic radio wave and microwave pulse mind control warfare, and how these advantages of this type of warfare is a very desired mechanism for warfare because they can target subject populations, and those subject-targeted populations will have no knowledge of the procedures being implemented on them, and this is happening. And they also tell us that about mind control is chemical and polypharmaceutical saturation has already been achieved over the past 20 years of implementation with this purpose in mind. and is achieved through powerful covert introduction into population areas. And they talk about how in some cases this is achieved by deliberate overt introduction through exposure and consumption on behalf of the population base in everyday usage of public water supplies, airborne pollutants, chemical agents in a wide variety of foodstuffs. Now, what we learned, and I'll just throw this in, is that the vaccination program, there are many dormant viruses that we're vaccinated with, and with the implementation and the saturation of frequencies, many of these dormant viruses are activated. But I'll go on to talk further about the Aquarius operations briefing because it is, you asked about who's behind these things. The Aquarius operations group and the circle of 7 CEOs that are implementing these various forms of mind control to augment a basic intolerance of each other under whatever guise is necessary. That's what they're saying in this document. And they say that these programs will eventually lead to internal unrest and an occupation by the United Nations forces who will, under orders, keep the peace of the host countries. And they talk about how, I link this to the Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars document and also the NASA War document, which further illustrates the massive covert plans of global manipulation, enslavement, and genocide.
Deborah, is this happening right now in the United States?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
In fact, millions and millions of people within the United States have already been specifically targeted with directed energy weapons and gang stalking groups, boots on the ground in cities throughout the country. And this is a worldwide assault on humanity.
And Deborah, this is where I wanted this whole interview to go, was to talk about the technology and whatever, but then end up here where we're talking about what is this stuff really doing to people. And what I wanted to get at is it's a double whammy, because you have your frequencies that are, assaulting our minds and doing it at the frequency where we're fight or flight. And you also have the information, the content, the hatred, and you, when you talked about, why aren't people scared about this stuff? Well, they're not scared. They're scared or not scared because they're worried about Trump. They're worried about the people coming across the border. They're worried about what this Ilhan Omar is doing and what's on Fox News. That's what's taken people's minds, and that's the first part of the double whammy, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, it's a media propaganda machine.
It's a hatred machine.
People enslaved through distraction.
Well, but I think I think they're trying to turn people on. I mean, they are. I don't think it. They are turning people on each other.
Absolutely.
Like dogs in a cage. And
that's why there was always the right and left in the illusion of a voting system.
Yeah.
To continue the polarization between groups.
Well, Deborah, let's talk about that sometime, because I didn't know this. I didn't know the CIA was out handing LSD to Timothy Leary and the Beatles and all that, but the argument can be made, and it will be made by me. The left was the result. The left was the product of the Central Intelligence Agency, and they just needed an alternative thinking.
It's a good thing, really, not to talk about left and right, because again, that is only promoting the opposition. It's just like the new Green Deal that's being discussed right now, and you brought that up a minute ago, and I wanted to add some things to that. It's not new. It's not green, and it's not a deal.
Right.
It's only being reactivated as a new Green Deal when it's already adopted in all of our cities. That's what the Paris Climate Agreement is all about. This is a done deal. It's not new.
Yeah.
It's polarizing the right and the left. And somehow or another, people believe that the current president is against the peace accord, or I should say the climate accord in Paris. He's not. He's not. They're rolling forward with the adopted plans in all of the cities. In fact, Trump, of course, as you know, signed the expedient rollout of 5G across the United States back in January, on January 18th of 2018, to roll out 5G across our country. Also, to utilize the illusion of running out of water and building more wastewater treatment plants. In other words, recycling our urine and fecal and pharmaceutical excrement back into municipal drinking water supplies. Now, in some of the World Bank documents that our team has looked at, we're finding that the injection of this, they call it tertiary water. We need to call it as it is. It's fecal, urine, and pharmaceutical poisons that they're going to be injecting and have been injecting into uphill streams and rivers that are flowing into these cauldrons of reservoirs that were always unnecessary to blend in with the poisons that are already there in the reservoirs. And for those of you that don't realize that reservoirs cause earthquakes, you now need to know that. You now need to know where are you positioned near a reservoir. We know here in Central California, the Oroville Dam, there was a concern that it was going to burst about a year or so ago. It is targeted. It will likely be targeted because that's what these reservoirs are designed to do. Many forms of targeting have been set up, and we have been under the illusion of science that has been falsified and created. And getting back to the new Green Deal, again, it's not new, and it's only creating divisiveness between the illusion of a right and left. And it's going to create embattlement in polling places when none of that matters. We're on autopilot. That's why when you go to your city council or your Board of Education or your public health departments, whatever agency you go to attempt to express a concern, even your water agencies, you are given maybe 3 minutes. That's pretty much standard. But if there are many questions, they'll reduce your time because they don't need to hear from you. The plans have already been adopted. And it's to continue giving all of us the illusion that we have public participation, and we don't. It's called the Delphi technique. And for those that have not personally attended a meeting in your city, in order to understand this, I would recommend you go to a meeting and see how they're conducted. I will tell you from firsthand experience, only about a week ago, and I'm going to need to be, sadly, signing off here pretty quick. I'm on another show here coming up. But I was witnessing firsthand, because I was at a County Board of Supervisors meeting here in Sonoma County back on June the 11th of 2019. Interesting that that was the same day that Trump signed the GMO to expedite genetically modified food in the United States because of food scarcity and climate change. So for those that don't think he's not behind climate change, read the executive order that he signed. But having said that, I'm there with my research team at this Board of Supervisors meeting when they are adopting septic tank requirements for all that are on septic systems. So for any of you that are in the country that are on septic systems, you are being moved off of rural country lands because the claim now is that the surface water and the contamination of septic systems is poisoning the streams and creeks and rivers. Now, they're starting out incrementally with a specific area here in Northern California that they're targeting. It's called the Lower Russian River area, and I say that again. This is near Bohemian Grove. And they're smaller lots, and it is probably the most affordable area in the entire county for people to live. And they're not, most of these properties are too small, and they won't be able to literally conform to the septic tank requirements. And the costs are anywhere between $20,000 and $50,000. And many of these people cannot afford that. So what has happened now they're saying it's only affecting about 10,000 properties right now, but that is not true. We heard statistics that had thousands more than what they're saying it's affecting, and they're holding down the effective count of properties to not scare people. Mm-hmm. So to not scare people, there's mass disinformation. These properties are going to be deemed uninhabitable, mm-hmm. because if you do not have connectivity to a municipal septic system, which they don't, and you cannot comply to the new federal septic regulations, and this is a nationwide now compliance issue that's now coming into play to literally move us off the rural lands, just like the Wildlands project that many of us have been talking about for years. It's in play. And there, as I've said many times during our discussion today, Matt, there are multiple redundant systems in play.
So, Deborah, before you run off on me, what's the time frame here? When can we start expecting laser energy from space? And when are they going to kick us off our land for the septic tank thing? And they're already doing that in Washington State.
Well, when you ask me that question, I let the documents speak for themselves. I let the policies that have been adopted speak for themselves. And I let the code enforcement requirements speak for themselves. When I read documents that code enforcement is going to require these types of retrofitting, and if you are not compliant to a variety of required retrofitting, then you will be identified as being unsustainable, and likely your property, according to the Public Health Department documents, could be deemed and would be deemed unsafe and uninhabitable, and your property would be red tagged. In building speak, red tagged means no occupancy allowed.
Yep.
So people's lands are being stolen right now for many of these types of reasons throughout the United States. And it's pot shots right now. It'll be 2 or 3 people in Idaho or people in Utah. We won't hear about how these assaults are occurring because it's not being reported in the news.
Yeah.
And I can say to you, these policies are fully in play. Mm-hmm. Our properties are being targeted. We are intended to not have housing. It is about equality. And when you look at the climate action plans and you read the plans carefully, you find the intention is to move the world back to the year 1750, pre-industrial, where we had no machinery and no equipment. They're saying at that period of time, we didn't have the greenhouse gas emissions problem. And that's what it's going to take to stop climate change. Mm-hmm. Now, climate change is weather weapons, and we are being deceived. We are being rolled upon by our cities in autopilot with Luciferian genocidal plans that are intended to take us off our lands, but not until we are further asset stripped. And I will say this. There are many loans now in place that are available that people will be offered for retrofitting. Some of those loans are called PACE, P-A-C-E. Some are called HERO loans. There's many different names of loans. They're all Rockefeller, Rothschild loans.
Right, and when they can't pay them off, they're going to own the land.
That's exactly right, because they sit in first position ahead of the mortgage.
Mm-hmm.
So for those of you that take a loan because you are being told that you must retrofit your home, and I will tell you this right now, there are different levels of required retrofitting. They're rolling through with the first level right now. And then it will become more and more, to where if you watch Soylent Green, that's where we're going. I just pulled up an article, actually, that was sent to me from overseas about how scientists now are urging the consumption of humans to reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
It must be from China. I don't even eat that chicken from Costco. Don't want to get sued by
it's
Costco.
Not from China. I will tell you, the article is not from China.
Okay.
But in any case, we've been consuming humans for a long time here in our food supply in the United States anyway, and certainly we've been injected with it because diploid, which is human tissue, is in many of the vaccines. But then we have Senomix, Senomyx, that has been used for a very long time as a flavor enhancement. It's an excitotoxin on our tongues, and it makes us gravitate towards eating the food that the large corporations use fetal tissue in. So you can just... I'm sorry?
I don't want to hear that. I have to eat in a few minutes.
What did you say?
I said I don't want to hear that. I have to eat in a few minutes. But go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I think if people look up Senomyx and you pull down the lawsuit that was put forth during the Obama administration by a Rights for Life group that didn't feel they should be using aborted fetal tissue in our food supply, and they lost the case because it was deemed as ordinary business. And you look at the corporate Luciferian corporations that supply much of the food, and you'll read the food sources that some of this had been put in. Now, whether they're still doing it is anyone's guess. But I can say to you that the Luciferian agenda is about power and sex and defying the human body in every way possible. Blood sacrificing, cannibalism, and sex trafficking, all of the above and more. And we are at a time now where we are being harvested as human beings by a system that's in autopilot. So we can put our heads in the sand, we can chant good thoughts, which are good. We need to have good thoughts as human beings. In fact, we advocate living in right conduct every single day and doing the next best right thing. But fairly soon, we're not going to be able to live that way because of 5G and the other frequencies that are going to control our thinking, implant dreams, insert ideas that are not our own, and literally create assassins to kill people, as we are seeing. Mm-hmm. This is a very sad, horrific reality that we face. And I think, in my opinion, and in the opinion of the years of dedication that StopTheCrime.net has made into finding the documents to bring these forward into the light, has been imperative. Because quite frankly, I would hope that if someone saw a person in a crosswalk, and they were legally in a crosswalk, and they saw some cars speeding down the road and knew they would not stop, that at least they would try to warn that person to get out of the crosswalk. And if that person chose not to, well, then that's their decision. Just as much of the information that we found in the documents is very tough. It's very scary. Mm-hmm. But people have decisions to make in finding out the truth. And the sad reality, Matt, is the truth has been withheld for so long that the enormity of the conspiracy is so horrifically awful that it is hard to wrap your head around. And I know you've probably seen or heard this quote, and I will leave the program with this in mind, besides recommending everyone go to primarywater.org. Understand we do not need to drink our urine, poop, and pharmaceutical water. We don't need to. We are not running out of water. I want everyone to look at the Great Man-Made River Project that was bombed when they bombed and blew up Libya. This was a humanitarian crisis because Muammar Gaddafi had delivered water for free to many of the towns in Libya, and that was blown up. And in fact, we had a whistleblower contact our research team telling us that they even blew up the well drilling equipment that Muammar Gaddafi had purchased from London, saying that they looked like missile launchers. And of course, they knew that they weren't missile launchers. They blew up the well drilling equipment so they couldn't re-drill for primary water. But here's a quote from William Casey, the CIA director in 1981, and he said, "We'll know our disinformation program is complete when everything the American public believes is false." So that's where we are. And like it or not, that is where we are. And I would recommend, again, everyone go to stopthecrime.net, primarywater.org, read the documents that we put out for you to see. We're putting together now cliff notes of these things because we know that many of you don't have the years that it has taken for us to fall in and out of PTSD as we've learned this information. And I can tell you, it's truth trauma. There's no ignoring the fact that this isn't a painful journey. It is. But there are many people that would rather know what they face. And if we're all walking into a box canyon of annihilation, there's some that may choose to go a different route and know the documents. So I want to thank you, Matt, for really giving me this time on your program today.
Well, thank you, Deborah. It's just your voice is so beautiful and so sweet, and your message is so frightening. It's hard to adjust the two, but it's been a real pleasure having you on, and I am sorry that Nick wasn't able to stick around. We really didn't get to discuss a lot of things, so I just want to encourage people.
Well, we really did.
Yeah.
We really did discuss a lot.
Yeah, but there's a lot more.
And of course there is. And that's why I think it's important for people to look at the documents, because when I give cliff notes of these documents, you can read them in their totality. You can download the report from Iron Mountain. The YouTube that is up for everyone to see was literally put together by a Christian organization, and it does compare parts of the report from Iron Mountain to biblical scripture. And sadly, that causes many people to not continue to watch the YouTube. I would say this about knowing. It is allowing people to find a spiritual connectivity and understand what a higher power is. When you look at such evil in the face, we are in the jaws of evil.
Yeah.
And there is good, and there is a God, and I happen to believe in God, and I happen to believe in Jesus, and I happen to look at documents that are evil and Luciferian, and it helps to really, really edify people who have doubt in good and evil when they realize the evil. So again, I want to thank you for the opportunity to share something.
Deborah, before you go, I just want to say you and I have a lot in common. We both believe in the idea that we have to stand before our Creator at one point and account for what we did here. And if we sit by and do nothing And I have 7 books I've written to try to educate people. You have a website full of information. I mean, it would take like months to go through all the information you have on stopthecrime.net. So I really appreciate what you do. And a lot of people really do. You and your group work very hard. And I just want you to know that I really appreciate you and what you've done. And I hope that my listeners will, if they don't know about you, will be able to look at your website. And so with that, I'm just going to say to my Deceptions of the Ages News listeners, we'll catch you next time. And for my Encounters USA listeners, I just want to tell you, if you're out in the woods or if you're in California, especially around the PG&E plants, you better watch your back.
Well, I need to broaden that again. I don't want people to misunderstand. This is in your town, every town, USA Inc. and Earth Inc. This is not restricted to California. We have to broaden our understanding of that because we are all under these plans that have been adopted worldwide, and we're all under heavily chemtrailed and aerosol skies worldwide. There are no borders to stop the frequencies either. We're all under this together everywhere. And so understand, it's not just one state. It's not just one area. You will see different types of assaults in different areas, but it is all under the same goal, and that's to reduce the population.
All right, Deborah. Well, there you have it. It doesn't matter where you are. You better watch your back.